Okay, I believe we are live and ready to go. Thank you so much for joining us. Please encourage other people to tune in. I'm DePel Schmagruder, the founder of Mob United. And as many of you probably know, this is Mental Health Awareness Month. And so we want to focus on mental health. And I thought it was important to address something that is a very, sadly, a prevalent issue that is increasing, which is suicide rates among Black youth. And Black males in particular, which is where our organization focuses. And I happened to meet a very special person working in this area named Dr. Tia Dole. I didn't ask if you want to be called Dr. Dole.
Well, it depends on who I'm speaking to. So if
You're
someone's being
speaking to me.
difficult,
Yeah.
you can call me Tia.
Yeah.
If someone's being difficult, I'm all about Dr. Dole.
Okay. Well, I hope not to be difficult. So I will go back forth between Tia and Dr. Dole. But first, I just want to tell people a little about you and the work that you do, and then we'll jump to the conversation because we don't have a lot of time. So, Dr. Tia Dole is the Chief 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline Officer at Vibrant Emotional Health. She's a licensed clinical psychologist and longtime advocate for the rights of those with intersectional identity. Prior to stepping into the role of Chief 988 Officer, Dr. Dole was the Executive Director of the Steve Fund, the nation's only organization focused on the mental health and emotional well being for young people of color. Additionally, Dr. Dole was the Chief Clinical Operations Officer at the Trevor Project, the world's largest suicide prevention and crisis intervention organization for LGBTQ youth. She oversaw all of the Trevor Project's crisis services programs as well as their volunteer community and increased their impact by a factor of four. She has a bachelor's degree from Carleton College, a master's degree in developmental psychopathology, which I'm not familiar with what that is, so maybe we can talk about it, from Columbia University. And she received a Fulbright fellowship to study forensic psychology in Switzerland, which sounds fun. She then completed her doctorate in clinical psychologist at Fordham University. She's a published author. She sits on many committees. And one of her passions that I want to talk about at some point is normalizing mental health conditions within
Mhm.
communities of color, LGBTQ communities, and helping people get access to services. So thank you so much, Dr. Dole, for being here with us today.
Thank you. And I clearly need to edit that bio. It's too long.
It's not too long. It's not too long given all that you've done and accomplished. Like you've done a
Mm,
lot and people should know about it. So
no.
that's where I want to start, just learning more about you and your background and how you got into this line of work.
Well, I will say, if you had spoken to my 8-year-old self, and I grew up in Boston, like a young Black girl in the 70s and early 80s, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? I was like, I want to be a psychologist. Uh, and
Wow.
it's
Okay.
a, I know, right? And it's kind of wild to think about, sort of ending up, but I was a very nosy child. And I was like a person, as a young person, who was always like asking questions like, well, why is this happening? Why are you doing this thing? My questions were always like oriented around behavior. So that I went farther back than I had anticipated. But I ended up working, I did most of my training in New York City. And one of the benefits of becoming a clinical psychologist in New York City are there's a million places where you can work. I worked at like every hospital in this city, Bellevue Forensic. I worked
Mhm.
everywhere. And what I found while I was doing my training is, so many people have stories. And I love working with folks of color, in particular, LGBTQ youth. And what I found for me as a person is my ability to manage risk was higher than like someone else, right? So it's
Yeah.
some people can stand on the ledge. I actually am terrified of heights. I cannot get on a ride, but I can work with people who are suicidal, or people who are self-injurious, or people who are engaging in risky behaviors. And I noticed that early on in my career, that I was just more okay with the risk, for
Mm.
good or bad. And that's how I ended up in suicide prevention. So I started working with kids with early psychosis as a trainee, and I just loved it, because you can actually prevent people from really converting to schizophrenia with an early
Mm.
intervention.
Really? I
Oh
didn't know
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. You like, if you catch it
Huh.
soon enough and you get that person on the right medication regime, you can actually really keep them functioning. And I was like super into that. But what we know, within the first year of conversion to schizophrenia, about 40 to 50% of young people make a suicide attempt.
Hmm.
And so, I
And
got
that's not diagnosed until a later age, right?
mm,
Schizophrenia.
it's like
Mhm.
18.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. You can start to see it at 16. Girls are a little bit later, but I just got more comfortable talking about suicide, and over time, it's just become really clear that a lot of people have suicidal thoughts,
Mm,
and nobody wants to talk about it because of the deep shame associated. Because of course, we're in a Judeo-Christian society, and so for me, I just say the word suicide all day long. And people can talk about it, and it doesn't make you a bad person. And so, like, sort of my
mhm,
life's work is for people to feel comfortable talking to me about things that they feel deep shame about, and then to let go of that shame.
mhm. That's amazing. You said so much that I want to follow up on. So I'll try to pick out bits and pieces. One is if you're a young person and you're listening to this, like being able to identify early on what your strengths are and what makes you unique and different from other people, I think is really
Hmm.
important. So
Hmm.
similarly, when I was, I think in ninth grade, I wanted to be a psychologist because I wanted to help people. But then I had friends who had a lot of problems and they kept telling me their problems and I'd give them advice and they wouldn't take the advice. And I was like, you're not taking advice. I'm not doing
Yeah,
this. So like I'm not doing this all day. So I figured out my risk tolerance for that was very low. So
yeah,
it's interesting to see, it's just interesting to hear how you describe it that way. You realized you had a higher tolerance and higher risk profile for things like that. So I think it's just important for
yeah,
people to be in tune with who they are.
yeah.
Also, I will
Well, and
say,
also, not for nothing, change is an interesting concept as a human being. Especially,
mhm,
I like working with young people because change happens much more quickly.
right,
Anytime you work with someone who's older adult, 30s, 40s, 50s, each decade to a certain extent, people get more dug into their
they're
perspective.
entrenched,
And
right?
so,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
harder. That's so
But
interesting.
as a and you work in I think you work in, ops, right? But, like, getting
Mhm,
people to change their perspective on how things should go is so challenging, and it takes time. So, sometimes my clients will say to me, like, "Oh, I know you're sick of hearing this thing," and I'm always like, "No, because this could be the" I'm thinking myself, "This could be
mhm,
the conversation that does enact change in you." And sometimes it
mm,
takes someone to experience something 20 times for change to happen. And then other people can look at something happening to someone else and be like, I need to change my own behavior. So it's
right.
like such a
Yeah.
wide range of what to makes change in
And
a human
are
being.
you trained to assess that? Like, how can you tell if someone is one type of person versus this is gonna be a long journey?
Mm, I think that's a fantastic question. Are we trained to assess that? I no. Um, like I think the way that they frame it as like readiness for therapy is what like you kind of
Okay.
and but that's just a great way to frame it. I'm gonna steal that from you because like the readiness for change and action
Mhm.
is this completely different set of readiness for therapy is different than readiness for change because
Right.
therapy
True.
could be like, I'm just ready to start talking about it.
Yeah, just talking about it. I'm not really
Mhm,
really ready to
mhm.
do anything about it, right?
Yes. Well, and some people are like, in order to change, I need to understand why I'm doing this thing. And I'm a big fan of being like, I hear you, and we can get to that understanding concurrent to making change. Let's change some of these behaviors that are harming you,
Mhm.
so that, and then change can kind of happen. And on a parallel, like your understanding, and then the behavioral change can happen on a parallel track.
Okay. So I wanna go back to your work and your day-to-day life, and you said something else that made me kind of jump, which is, like, you say the word suicide all day long, and I have to tell you,
Yeah.
like, it is a topic that I'm very uncomfortable with. I think most people are,
Mhm.
and, I was even, like, nervous about how to enter this conversation because it's a concept that's just so, troubling and disturbing that it's hard for me to even talk about it.
Yeah.
Um, so for you to say you say it all day long, that's amazing to me that you're able to do that, and I would just love to hear what is your day-to-day work like? I know in your current role and your previous roles, you've been in this space for a while. What does that look like when you're dealing with such heavy issues and people who are possibly on the brink of,
Yeah.
ending it all?
Yeah. Well, sort of my day job, right? We serve 13,000 people a day. Mm. Uh, and, we have like a network of crisis centers and the National Lifeline. But my work
And is it
day,
virtual or in person? Like
oh,
both?
it's all anonymous. They
Okay, got
call,
it.
chat, and text, and it's free of charge. And it's
Okay.
federal programs, fantastic. And we sometimes. like I think we're on track for about 6 million people a year. We're who are reaching out, and and for context, when the National Lifeline started 20 years ago, they served 40,000 people a year, and that's how many we serve. But we serve more than that in a month, right? And so
Yeah.
it's no, wait, in a month, no, in a week.
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah.
And so there's a need there. But I think, my day-to-day like work is really about problem solving. I always consider myself, especially as an executive, like of removing barriers, brainstorming, engaging in thought partnership. How can we move this from here to there? Is it a rock? Is a boulder? Is a pebble?
Hmm.
Right? How do we make sure that the right people are here? But everything that we do is oriented to make sure that the people that we're serving are served no matter what their identity, what their location, and what their needs are. And so it's like a person who is, literally standing on a bridge,
Hmm.
and they reach out to us. And then we have people who are figuratively standing on a bridge, which is like, I'm actually at my wit's end. And then we
Hmm.
have people who call us, and their family members are really in crisis. What can we do? And so
Okay.
it's a full range of the folks that we serve. And it is, I would say, maybe because the work is oriented around helping and problem solving, it doesn't feel heavy in the same
Hmm.
way. Because it's like something feels heavy, I think, when you don't have anybody to carry it with you.
Hmm.
And so because we're all of us are aligned with this work and really just hyper focused on solving, we feel like we are making progress. I just feel like it's a shared load that like I feel incredibly privileged to be a part of.
And depending on the situation, are they paired with an individual counselor, or is it a team of people? Like, how does it all come together in this
It's
type of
like they
environment?
call and then they work with one individual crisis counselor who is just who's trained. They receive
Okay.
extensive training, and they are able to sort of like they do a risk assessment. How are you? Where are you right now? Okay,
Hmm.
tell me what's happening, and then they connect them to services. And at the end of the call, if they're like, "Hey, do you want us to call you tomorrow?" We'll call.
Hmm.
We'll call you tomorrow. We'll call you every day if you need to be called. We'll
That's
make sure that
wonderful.
we can get you connected to services in your community because most of the calls are answered locally. So we route calls based on the location of the caller. We can't see the location of the caller, to be clear. But if you live in
Hmm.
New York City, you're routed to your local New York City call center.
Okay. That's wonderful. So, just to back up a little bit, we are a nationwide organization of moms of Black boys and men. And we started in 2016 based on multiple police killings of unarmed, innocent Black boys and men. And, kind of came together rapidly to form an organization that focuses on that, but then quickly realized the problem was much bigger and expanded to focus on the education system, the school to prison pipeline, the mental health system, which is very much intertwined with the criminal justice system. So, we have this broad mandate to really try to improve treatment of Black boys and men in society. And
Mhm.
one of the things we've definitely noticed throughout our time doing this, which has now been almost 9 years, is the rise in suicide rates among Black boys,
Mhm.
among Black people in general, especially young people. But just to share a few stats that I found, one that stuck out is suicide is the second leading cause of death for African Americans between the ages of 15 and 24, according to the CDC. And it's particularly prevalent among Black men who die by suicide at a rate of 4 times that of Black women and girls. So just wanted to, hear your perspective and your experience with that, and why you
Yeah.
think it's so prevalent in this population.
Well, and I'm going to add another statistic, which is like among like Black boys out of all demographic, under the age of 12 are most likely to die by suicide. And I think one of the
Under the
part
age
of
of 12.
yeah, yeah, like 8-year-olds, right? And the thing about those statistics is not just because they're terrible, but it's also the shift, where 20 years ago you would hear, Black folks are really protected from suicide comparison
Right.
to white folks or other groups. And there has been a real shift to find that we're at same or greater risk depending on like the age group and also like gender, and if you add in intersexual identity like LGBTQ, you're going to
Absolutely.
see those numbers jump up.
Yeah.
I think there was a report came out of essentially Congress, the ring the alarm report. I don't know if you read that. It came out, let's say, like 5 years ago,
Mhm.
And it was called Ringing the Alarm, which was something is happening with Black children. And sort of like all these members of Congress, like Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman, and I'm on one of her mental health committees,
Mhm.
was like, something is going on. And I really appreciated that report. So, what is it? I think that racism has a lot to do with it. I
It's
think that
stressful. Yeah.
well, like, and I'll say, I like whenever people ask me, like, what do you think is happening? I'll speak specifically about Black folks, but I'm going to speak like maybe generally about what I think is happening in the United States.
Mhm.
Last year, the former Surgeon General Vivek Murthy published a report called "The Epidemic of Loneliness." I don't know if you saw it.
No, I didn't
Um,
see that.
like, read it,
Wow.
and basically what it says is that we as Americans are more isolated than we ever have before. And it kind of quantifies like how much time people used to spend with their family and friends and how much time they spend now. And what we find is that people are completely isolated. They spend so many more hours per week alone on their
Mm.
device than
Mhm.
they ever have, and that this disconnection and loneliness is sort of destroying our society, and that you need people, you need purpose, as one other P, um, and the fact that if without people, without purpose, without having a sense of connectiveness, um, that's why people feel so sad and lonely. And I think
Mhm.
suicide isn't always driven by loneliness, let's say, but I do think undergirding our society is a slow, this is my personal opinion, by the way, there's
Mhm.
a slow erosion of the way that we interact with each other. And I always use this
For
as an
sure.
example in my mind. So during COVID, people all had masks on. When you go to the grocery store, there was like this, like, how you would like jump away from people, like if they got too close, especially I lived in Harlem.
Mhm.
And then post COVID, I noticed that there's still this jumpiness and distance, and people don't like people reach in front of drives me bonkers. Reach in front of me in the grocery store to take things off of shelves. They don't say excuse me. They don't make eye contact. And I
Mm.
think I see this shift, and this is me also becoming an old
That's New
person.
York too, though.
But it happens everywhere. I see the
Really?
difference. People are not as connected, and people don't even want to make eye contact with each other.
Mhm.
So just thinking about that shift in society, the slow erosion of family life, and then you kind of lay over, institutional racism. And I think that there is, in the last 10 years, a sort of erasure of a historical perspective that you see accelerated right now, which is
Mm.
like,
Absolutely.
okay, you know what, slavery was that much that, why aren't you over that, right? There is
Mhm.
there is a lack of acknowledgement that the way that institutional racism is embedded and intertwined in our systems, down to in New York City, the educational system. Like they're like, oh, there's a million students in New York City, but getting into Stuyvesant, which is like a specialized high school, is nearly
Mhm.
impossible if you are a Black kid living literally one block from that school,
Right. Yes.
because of the location, right? You live in, and it's in the Bronx, right? Your chances of getting into that school are basically zero. And that's because of institutional racism. And so I think that for Black boys, and for young people in general, there's like a lack of hope for the future. There's a sense that I'm not going to find a job. I'm not going to be able to be successful here. People don't believe in me in the society. They don't see me as a human being. I think the dehumanization of Black bodies over time has created a lack of hope for the future.
Yes, we've talked a lot about dehumanization over the years.
Mhm,
It's really sad. And I want to highlight something else you said about how it's even more pronounced for LGBTQ plus youth.
mhm,
So I just want to read a few stats that I found about that. The rate of attempting suicide among LGBTQ plus teens is more than 4 times the rate for all U.S. teens. 39% have considered suicide in the past year. 46% for transgender and non-binary youth, and more than 1 in 10 LGBTQ plus young people have attempted suicide, which is
mhm.
just staggering. Do you want to speak a little about, um, you know, the drivers for that, and
Yeah.
the intersectionality and how it all comes together to create like an even higher risk profile?
Well, and I'll start with a positive statistic, right? So, I used to work at the Trevor Project, and we started doing national surveys.
Mhm.
So, a lot of this kind of LGBTQ research comes out of the Trevor Project, which is fantastic.
Yes.
My favorite statistic that has come out of their work is that one accepting adult reduces the risk of suicide in LGBTQ youth by 40%.
Wow.
Meaning that if you're at church and an old lady says, "Baby, God loves you no matter what," right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I think that really speaks to what is behind some of those stats, which is LGBTQ youth, LGBT youth of color in particular, feel a lot of fear of rejection. They are afraid of being a burden on their families. You
Mhm.
add in the element of religion, which says, like who you are and how you want to live your life is against God's plan for you. You have all those things, and I think that a lot of young people think that the choice of suicide makes sense based
Mhm.
on what they're facing, which is potentially a loss of a family member. My mother, my father might reject me if they knew exactly who I was,
Mhm.
or I would bring shame on this family by being who I was. And then the options is to be closeted,
Right.
and to not be able to live my authentic self. So it's like you're between a rock and a hard place. Either I'm lying about who I am, or I'm completely alone here. And you think back to what we were talking about, which is that people are already isolated, and it just feels like a viable option. It's interesting because suicide to me is a pathway for release for some people, right?
Mm.
It's like there's like different ways that people have suicidal thoughts. Like for some people, when you think about suicide, it actually is calming,
Mm.
because you're in the middle of chaos, and then you think to yourself, okay, well, if I just end my life, then I don't have to deal with that. It actually de-escalates them because they're like, "Whew, okay, good." But thinking about suicide almost becomes to me like an automated path. I don't know if you've ever driven a car or gotten home and don't really remember how you got there. And you're like, whoa, yeah, like you were kind of like half asleep. Like thoughts like that around suicide can become habitual,
Mm.
and they become sort of like embedded in the way that people think about a way of de-escalating the emotional intensity that they're experiencing in their life. And then, of course, a lot of people they're experiencing terrible things, right? LGBTQ youth in particular, of being victimized either by family members or at school, and it really is like I want this to stop, and the
Wow.
only option that they see in front of them, 14 years old, is to die by suicide. So I think that the way that I tend to think about, tagging in adult allies, as
Mhm.
I call them, is like, listen, this is a child. I don't care if it's a black child, it's an LGBTQ child. Your job as an adult is to provide a safe sense of safety for
Mhm.
young people. And if that's not something that you can do, you shouldn't be interacting with them at all
Right.
or having them, because it doesn't matter the identity of this child in front of you. They need you to be an adult.
Absolutely. No,
Mhm.
thank you so much. And we're an organization of moms, so I want you to speak to moms in particular because we
Okay.
should be our child's biggest ally, protector, cheerleader. So, two questions. One, what should we be looking for in terms of warning signs that may indicate that our child may be considering suicide? And
Mhm.
what can we do to prevent them from getting to that point?
Yeah. I think and this speaks to any sort of mental health, but let's say suicide in particular, you look for change. You're looking for anything that is a shift, a significant shift in behavior. And it can be things that, like, let's say the young person starts to withdrawal and they go in their room and you don't see them. And
Mhm.
what I hear a lot from parents are like, well, teens are moody, blah, blah, blah. No,
Mhm.
that's not true, right? The teens are, yes, they're moody, but a
Mhm.
young person suddenly shifting from being engaged in the family to being completely isolated in their room is a clue to you that something is going on. And I
Mhm.
think the hard part for me is like when I know other parents talk to each other and they'll be like, oh, I know my kid went through this. It's not a big deal.
Right. Yeah.
But you as a
Absolutely.
mom can feel in your heart something is wrong. The mother is the barometer. right? You can
Mhm.
tell the weather. And what we tend to do is talk ourselves out of our concerns as being, well, I'm just being difficult or whatever. If your body is telling you something is wrong with your child, please don't ignore it, and don't listen to people telling you that you're being over the top.
Mhm. What should we
Um,
do if we suspect something is wrong?
oh, I think so. Young people do better, especially boys, do better with parallel activities. And I'll
Mhm.
say this: if you go in your son's room and sit down on his bed and say, "I can tell something's wrong. Tell me," you're not going to get anything out of them.
Yeah,
You're just
I can
not.
I can attest to that.
But if you do an activity together, if you can get that kid to go bowling, to play golf, do a long car trip,
Mhm.
something where you're not looking at each other, but you're sitting side by side, and you say, "Hey, I noticed something's different." No accusation, just like, "I
Mhm.
noticed something felt different. Do you see a difference in you too?"
Mhm.
Right? Neutral. You're gonna get something out of there.
Mm.
And, like, I think that using examples like, "I saw that you used to hang out with, Bobby or whatever, and, you all
Mhm.
stopped hanging out. Was curious, did something happen?" But parallel, um, like not facing, not
Yeah,
cornered,
not
um,
questioning.
you
I think
know
that's great advice, just based on my own experience, that resonates a lot, so
Mhm.
I'm gonna try to do that more instead of the direct
And it's an
interrogation.
activity. It's not dinner. Moms always wanna
Yes.
take their kids out to dinner. Mm-mm. Unless you have a foodie kid, that is
Yeah.
not what they
I
wanna
have a
do.
foodie kid who likes to cook, so we can cook together, and I can get
Yes,
to
yes,
this
you put
point.
on some music
Yeah.
and you create a non-pressure environment of not making eye contact necessarily and giving an opportunity to share. I also think, I think especially when you think about like LGBTQ youth in Black communities, where Black communities are a little, I think, a little bit less likely to accept a queer kid,
Mhm.
and I think like most moms have an idea that maybe this could be in the realm most of the time,
Yes.
but there's a lot of denial around it, and I think actually checking with yourself, like, do you want a gay kid or do you want a dead kid?
Mm.
That sounds really harsh on my part, but which would you
Mm.
prefer? Because if you're communicating to your child, even unconsciously, that being gay is not okay with you, I will tell you they're not going to tell you. You're not going to know anything about their life, and they might be in danger at some point. And so, I think, you know, even the Pope has said being gay is cool. So, like, I think people have to get over
The new
themselves.
black pope, I might add.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, that was quite interesting. Oh,
I
wait, no,
know.
the way they said on the news, his grandparents were Creole and Black, and I
Right.
was like, "That just sounds like
So
he's
right,
biracial."
based on America, that make him black. So
Mhm.
we have 1 minute. I know you're tight for time,
Yeah.
and I would love to have a part 2 because there's so many more questions I had, but I just wanna ask you this one last question,
Yes, ma'am.
that's okay, which is in your bio, you talk about the importance of normalizing mental health conditions in our communities, Black communities, LGBTQ plus communities. What does that look like, and what would have to happen for that to come true?
I think that for a lot of folks, being, having a mental health condition, being depressed, anxiety, whatever, is seen as a flaw.
Mhm,
And it's seen as a thing that's fundamentally wrong with you and that is permanent. So it's like, okay, it's like almost like you're damaged goods. And I think that, and I get
mm,
that. That's in Black culture, we tend to be a little bit harsher because we know that the world is harsher. So you're trying to get your kid to pull it together. You've got to be able to stand up for yourself, blah, blah, blah. That
mhm,
I get it, right? And I've said the same thing to my own children, but I think that, first of all, mental health conditions are not necessarily permanent, and people can recover from them, but they can only recover from them with treatment. And
mhm,
so, if we acknowledge that having a mental health condition is a thing that is okay, and that's something that can be treated and recover from the way that I mean, frankly, you develop type 2 diabetes,
Yeah, you get the medicine
you can
and
actually get you well, you can actually change your diet and actually not
right.
even need
Yeah.
medicine, right? There
Yeah.
you can recover. And I think there's a deep fear of adding another layer of illness or, pressure on young people of color that is terrifying to a Black parent. And so you're like,
Mhm.
you've got all these things as a Black boy, he's in the Brooklyn, he has all this stuff, and he has a mental health condition, and he's gay. Like,
Yeah.
how many more things can he take? And
Right. How
so,
many more barriers and obstacles will you have to overcome? So you hope that's not the case, right? Because they already
yeah.
have so much that they're facing.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
uh, hopefully with talking about it more and understanding that people can get better, that we'll have a little bit more hope.
Hmm. Thank you so much. I think that it is a wonderful place to end, but I do want to ask you to be willing to come back to continue this
Of course.
conversation.
Happy to.
That was so rich, and I just appreciate you so much for taking the time to do this. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me.
Take care. Mhm.